What's going on, guys? It's Dean here again with No Code Black Box, and in this video I'm going to show you guys how to create a very simple chatbot with Bubble and OpenAI's newly released GPT-4 API. This API is currently in early access at the moment. There is a waitlist that you can sign up with and apply for. It's pretty straightforward, and I believe they are rolling it out a lot quicker now, assuming, because I just got early access to it. But yeah, this is going to be very similar to our last tutorial we did with creating a chatbot using the Turbo 3.5 model. In fact, it's pretty much the same thing. The only thing we're going to be changing is the model parameter in the body. But I'm just going to walk you guys through it again. Again, it's pretty straightforward anyway, but you can see here we can ask it something like, please explain how taxes work. We'll go ahead and ask it, and then once we get our response back from OpenAI, it should display it. And also, I will like to note that this chatbot's the token pricing is it's a lot more expensive than the Turbo 3.5 model. So keep that in mind when you guys are using this, and kind of as the conversation history stacks up, it can get pretty expensive if you're not careful. So you can see we have our text completion, our response here. It gives us a breakdown of just how taxes work. And I've set the max token limit on this, so I think 300, but you can see we can then ask it something like, please explain it like I'm a 5-year-old, right? So obviously it would, if there was no conversation history given to this, it would have no idea of the context. Like, what does it mean if it didn't have this conversation history? And in fact, we can even go step by step. And if we ask it, we can see, I'll move my little head up here, and in the actual API part, we can see that in the body, in the prompt, we have our previous request that we had in response, and then it's kind of adding on our new message. So please explain it like I'm a 5-year-old. So you can see that it's kind of joining those all together, which again we'll look into in the workflow once we start building it. But you can see it's given us our response. So kind of gives us a nice, simple way of explaining it. But yeah, guys, so let's actually get into building this. So you can see I have a blank canvas loaded up here. The first thing we're going to want to do is install or connect OpenAI's API. So we want to install the API connector, and then add another API. We'll just call this OpenAI. And then we'll call this one, we got to expand it. We will call this GPT-4 Chat completions, because that's the endpoint we're going to hit. We're going to want to add shared headers really quick. And again, if we come back into OpenAI's documentation, we can obviously see that the GPT-4 model, the newly released model, is compatible with the completions endpoint, which is what ChatGPT uses, if you're obviously familiar with that. So if we go into the API reference and then the chat and the create completion, we can see an example request they give us. Again, OpenAI has made this very simple for us. So we're going to come here into the content type and put that in for the key, application, JSON, oops, sorry. And then next we're going to need our authorization. So again, for this, you're going to need your API key, and if you want to use the new GPT-4, you need to be approved with it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to use it. You can use the GPT Turbo 3.5, which again, view my last tutorial on that. I'll put a link in the description for that. But again, it's very similar. It's essentially the same workflow that we're following. So I've gone ahead and pasted that. Next, let's get our actual endpoint. We're going to hit the chat completions one. Again, the GPT-4 model is compatible with this, so we can simply just paste this in here. Make sure you guys select a post request, and we're going to use this as an action, so we can use it in our workflows. We already have the headers installed, obviously, we just did, and then the actual body. So this is the request we're going to make. You can just copy this, and if we go ahead and paste this, rather than the Turbo 3.5 model, we can just put in GPT-4, not 5, they haven't released that yet. And I guess right now we can actually go ahead and initialize it, and we should get a response. If we click show raw data here, and you can see we get hello, how can I help you today? So we'll go ahead and save that. So now, guys, we have successfully connected to OpenAI's system. Now, obviously, we don't want to make this hard-coded here. We obviously want to add what the user inputs, right? So to do that, we have to make this dynamic. And there's a couple of ways we could structure this. If you guys see this object within this array here that I'm highlighting in these brackets, that's essentially the JSON object that we're going to send. But again, we want to make this dynamic so the user can input it. So for that, we're just going to have a prompt tag here, and then you can see it's added it to the dynamic value here, unchecked private. And then if we come into the value, we'll just go ahead and paste what was previously in there. Again, just make sure you don't copy the array, you just want that object. And if we come into the value, paste that in there, we should again be able to initialize this. And you can see here we get the same response, so we are good. Now again, this prompt is what the user is going to essentially input it. Now obviously from here we can also add other parameters to our body, so we can say the max tokens is something like, we'll say 200 in our case. Now you can set this to whatever you want. I just wouldn't recommend not having this, because as I mentioned, the token usage can get pretty expensive with GPT-4 if you're not careful. And I believe if you do sign up with an account, still they do give you free credits. I think it's up to $18. I'm not sure, that's when I signed up, but I could be wrong. But yeah, so kind of the whole idea with this is we essentially want to replicate what OpenAI has done. So what I mean by this is, say a user enters in another question or has wants to ask more, right? We want to essentially add on that extra object from the previous, and it's only going to get bigger as the user asks more questions. And this is essentially how OpenAI takes into context of the previous conversation history. How we're going to structure this is essentially each one of these objects, we're going to create a thing in the database. Every chat that either the user types or the the assistant gives back is going to be a object in our backend. And I know that might not make a whole lot of sense right now, but let's actually go ahead and create that. So we're just going to create a new thing, a new type in our database. We're going to call this chat, and then create that, and then we're going to add a few different fields. So add the JSON, then this is going to be a text, and then just go ahead and we'll call this response, also going to be text. And then last one, we're going to want to actually create an option set first. So to do that, just come into the option sets, and then skip the tutorial there. We're going to just create the same thing that we just said, GPT role, create that, and then create a few more option sets. So we're going to call this system, user, and assistant. So for those of you guys that don't know, these are essentially the three options that OpenAI gives us If we come back into the documentation and the chat completions, you can see system, content, user, assistant, those three. And essentially, the system is kind of like a precursor to, you're essentially telling OpenAI, hey, this is what we're going to be using you for, right? So we're saying it, in this case, your helpful assistant, and then the user is what the user is going to type in, and the assistant is the response that we get back. But again, we want to have all of these are essential to what we're trying to do, because we not only need the context of what the user asked, but also what the response that the assistant gave us. So if we come back, you can see we have those, and then if we just come back into app data, if we come back into data types, we're going to create a new field. We'll call this GPT role again, and then for the field type, we'll select that new option set that we just created. So let's go ahead and do that. And if we come back into the design, I've gone ahead already and just created a very simple, if you guys look in the elements tree here, it's just a repeating group. Again, we'll tie up all these data sources here in a second once we get our workflow set up, but a repeating group with a role and response. These are just text fields, and then we have an input field here with a button that will initialize the generation of all of this. So again, very simple. We'll come back and set this up, but I've just gone ahead and added that for now. So if we just click on the ask button, and we're going to want to come and start/edit the workflow. So we're going to want to create a new thing, essentially. Again, that database, that table that we set up in our database in the back end, we're going to want to create a new record every time a user or an assistant responds. So just type in and create a new thing. What's the new thing we're going to create? We're going to create a new chat, and then we're essentially going to create from the new fields that we had. So first one we'll do is a response, and I guess this is kind of misleading because it should be just text essentially, because it could also be a request, but we're going to take in the input ask questions value. So this is this input field right here, and then for the next thing we're going to have a JSON, and again, this is what we're creating, or what we're trying to replicate here. So I'll just come here and copy that. Make sure you don't copy that comma right there as well, and get out of that little that value there. And then so rather than having this content, obviously we want to make this part dynamic, and we're just going to have that same value, input ask questions value. We can just leave that as the user, and then for the role we're just going to have get an option GPT role. Remember the option set that we created, and we're going to have this set to user. Next, we're going to essentially want to take this object that we just created, this new record that we created in our database, and plug it into the backend. So in this action here, we want to type in the OpenAI GPT-4 chat completions. And again, you're not going to see this if you don't select action like we did in our, we set it as an action back here instead of just data. You won't see it in the workflows if you don't have that set. But again, rather than having this hard-coded, we're going to essentially look through our database. So we're going to do a search for what are we going to search for? The chat, and then we are going to each item's JSON, grab each item's JSON, and then join it. So this is again where we're kind of adding the conversational history, and then we just want to add a comma and then a space. That's all you want to do. Make sure you have it specifically like that, or you're going to get some parsing errors. You can kind of see it like that. And again, if we come back to the OpenAI's documentation, you can see that's what they've provided us. You can see this object with a comma and then the next one here down below. So that looks all good there. For our last workflow here, we want to replicate what we've done in step 1, except rather for the user, we want to do it for the actual assistant. So click to add another action. We're going to create a new thing. What are we going to create? Another chat record in our database. And again, the same 3 fields, except we're going to want to do it with the actual response. So you can see here, we'll select response again, and that corresponds, makes a lot more sense. But we want to set this to the result that OpenAI gives us, and we're going to select choices, and then the first item's message content. And I know this because I've done this several times now, but obviously they do kind of give you the response and the documentation. You can see what we really want is this content here, and that's in the choices, messages, content. And then we also want to trim this as well. The only reason we want to trim this is because sometimes we do get some kind of wonky responses. And then next, the JSON object, and we can just kind of copy what the assistant gives us back. We'll get out of that for now, copy that, and then obviously rather than the content, we will have this dynamically displayed from what it actually gives us. So literally the same step, the same object that we get here, insert dynamic element, and then result of step 2's choices, first items, message content, and then we just want to trim this as well. And then lastly, for the GPT role, we're just going to want to do assistant. And you can obviously, you can see here that I just hard-coded assistant. I guess we could have hard-coded as well here, but I'll just select my option set. So now that we have those workflows set, let's go into the front end, right, and set this all up. So now that we are back in our front end, we want to select the repeating group, make sure that's selected in the elements tree, and then for the type of content, we're going to want to select chat. Because remember, we want to get this essentially from the chat table that we created in our backend, and we're going to do a search for type chat, and we can actually sort it by the created date, so that way we can get it in chronological order with how a normal messaging system would work. Descending, I guess we'll just select it to no. I think that is the default anyway, but we'll just put no for now. And then the kind of 2 text fields we have within it, again, the role and the response. So for the role, we'll just select the current cells, chats, GPT roles, display. Again, this is that option set that we created. So from now we know whether a text is from the user or the assistant, and then right below that we will have the actual either request or response. So current cells, chats, responses. Oh yeah, I think that actually should be it. Oh, and one more thing, guys, in the plugins, I forgot I had I had one of the parameters set to max token. We want to make sure this is max tokens. Otherwise, we're going to get an error when we send a request. So if we actually come and preview it, we should be able to actually request it. So we'll say, we'll ask it a question: what is the best business to start in 2023? You can see our question is prompted there, and then we should get our response with the role set to the assistant. And then from there, we'll ask it another question. Okay, so it's impossible to predict what business. So you can see it gives us our response, and then we can actually ask it another question off of that. So I'll say, which is the easiest? And then again, I'll do step by step to show you that we're essentially adding on the previous conversation history objects. And yeah, so you can see in our prompt here, we have my first request with the given response by OpenAI, which I just showed you, and then along with the question I just asked it, so which is the easiest. So you can see the easiest business to start would likely be in e-commerce or online retail. And yeah, guys, you can keep kind of asking as many questions as you want, but like I said, the more you ask, it's essentially going to use that request as that'll cost you tokens as well. Just keep that in mind. So if we actually go back into our Bubble editor and then select the data and make sure you guys select the all chats, you can actually see that every request or response that we have given or been provided is actually logged here in our database. Yeah, and obviously if you would want to make this a scalable chatbot application, you would want to make it dependent on, for instance, who is logged in, because right now technically anyone could access this. You guys could access this and then just continue from where the conversation started. But obviously you would want to make it more robust, essentially, to allow for different users or maybe different conversations like we have with ChatGPT, where you can create a new one and that would essentially start a new conversation. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you're able to take something away. And right now I'm actually developing a kind of essentially the same chatbot application that you guys are familiar with ChatGPT. As I mentioned, with having different conversations as well as a kind of login portal. And I'm actually going to release this for free as a template. And if you want to have access to this, please come in our newly created Discord. I'm going to leave a link in the bio. But if you guys are interested in that, I'm going to post a link to that template in there so you can essentially clone it, if you will, with Bubble. So again, it's going to be completely free and open sourced. So yeah, I hope you guys look forward to seeing that released. Thank you guys.